Bible tells you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go.
Which is, why does religion have such a persistent hold on human thought despite all that we know of science?
Yeah, I think there are several ways one can address that question. Let me address it in a... Consider not long ago when so much of the Western world was... the state was the religion. And we have actually moved quite a distance from that, compared with 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, the era of the Inquisition and this sort of thing. And so to say that it has such a grip, it has a fraction of the grip that it once did on the operations of human conduct and of society. So the real question is, if implicit in that is, given what we know of science, why would religion still have any grip at all? Why does it still have a big grip? Because it's not a big grip when you look in the developed world. So, in fact, most of Europe are just, they're whole countries where religion has essentially disappeared entirely. And the countries are not full of violence and, it's just the assumption that you have to be religious to be moral is a false one. It's empirically false, because you just look around in places where that's the case. So that's one fact, and we pull away from that a little. There's plenty of what goes on in religious texts that has tremendous value to how to think about life and how to treat one another. In fact, Jefferson created what was essentially what you can think of as Thomas Jefferson, the Jefferson Bible. I don't know if you ever heard of this. He went through the Bible, and I think both the Old and the New Testaments, and he crossed off everything that was sort of mythical, magical, things that clearly violated known laws of nature, and kept the rest, and said, here is the stuff of the Bible that should have value to any modern person going forward. If you look at people who are religious today, who are not in conflict with science, they have viewed their religious text as a spiritual, something that gives them spiritual support, not as a science textbook. The conflict in society is when you have those who are still religious, who want to use their religious text as their access point to understanding the natural world. And persistent efforts of the past to make that happen have just simply failed. The Bible does not work as a science textbook. In fact, Galileo knew this, and he himself was a religious man. He's famously quoted as saying, the Bible tells you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. So on that scale, the conflict comes about when that subset of the religious community feels threatened by scientific discoveries that are different from how they interpret what the natural world should be in the Bible.
Religion still hangs on mostly because it filled the gaps before science existed. People didn't understand lightning, disease, or the stars, so they called it divine power. But once we started testing ideas instead of praying for answers, the gaps started closing fast. We discovered electricity, germs, gravity, evolution, all without any help from Scripture. What's left of religion today survives more in culture than in truth. In Northern Europe, where belief in God has dropped below 30%, countries like Denmark and Sweden consistently rank among the safest, healthiest, and most educated in the world. That alone proves morality isn't handed down from the sky. It's built through empathy, cooperation, and shared progress. Even the Bible shows its age. Genesis 1:6-8 describes a solid dome holding back waters above, which made sense before telescopes, but not after we saw galaxies billions of light years away. The more we learned, the smaller those old explanations became. Science didn't kill faith. It just replaced superstition with understanding.
Bible.
I think it's that point where you get to the concept of the God of the gaps. You go, we do not understand this, science takes us so far, but we don't understand anything beyond that. Therefore, that's God. The stuff that we don't get, that's God. And the trouble with that is the moment that you actually go, no, we do understand that now, is people going, well, did God just go away then? And And it goes back, nice simple things like the rainbow. The point where you go, well, the rainbow actually, it's an optical effect. It's not something magic that gets put up in the sky to memorialize the flood.
Plus, did you know that everyone sees a unique rainbow?
No.
That's right. The rainbow is an optical effect for the person who sees it. So if you stand 10 feet to my left, you see a different rainbow than I see. It's a remarkable, fun fact about rainbows.
My favorite fun fact about rainbows is the fact that they were originally believed to have 6 color bands, but that Newton added indigo and violet.
Yeah, Newton liked
his 7.
the number 7. He had
Yeah.
the mystical feeling for the number 7. Throws in indigo that no one else sees.
Yeah, hands up here, who actually goes, indigo, violet, there's the indigo.
Yeah,
you don't.
yeah.
You just go purple.
Yeah, exactly.
Go blue, purple. But
Oh,
that would
so
be 6.
another thing about the rainbow, because each rainbow is unique to the viewer, it can only be a rainbow that is exactly face on to you. You've never seen a rainbow that was like at an oblique angle. Think about it. They're exactly hemispherical in front of you. That's why you can never get to the base of the rainbow. Because that would mean your perspective on it would change. That's what makes it a good place to hide the gold. Okay? In case you didn't know. All right.
Are you outing yourself here as an unbeliever in leprechauns? People have been burned at stakes for that.
Indeed am. Another thing, you mentioned the God of the gaps. In a free society, a free pluralistic society, where the freedom of the expression of religion is constitutionally protected, which is a fundamental part of why America was so attractive to immigrants from around the world whose religious differences were not being supported in their hometown. I will never be one to tell you what you should believe or what you should not believe. What I will say is that if you want to say that where we don't understand things, that's where God rests, that's where God operates, the God of the gaps argument, because I get asked that all the time. What was around before the universe? I don't know. Must have been something, God. So they got to stick in God where we're not there yet. And I just say, we got top people working on that. It's a current frontier. We're not there yet. And given the history of the moving frontier, where people had previously said, well, God must be operating, we're long past that. Those explanations have come. And so there's no compelling reason to say God did it and then sort of give up and go on to the next problem. My issue with the God of the gaps is that if you feel that way, you should not be writing the science curriculum of a classroom. Okay? That's all. Okay? Because if you do, you are undermining the very process of what science is all about. Because the God of the gaps principle is it's a philosophy of ignorance, whereas science is a philosophy of discovery. And that's an important distinction between the two. And if you remove that foundation for what builds science, you are undermining the capacity of your culture, of your nation, to compete technologically in the 21st century. So it is not without consequence to have conduct of that way.
The God of the gaps idea is one of the oldest habits of human thinking. When we don't know something, we fill it with a divine placeholder. But history shows that every time science closes one of those gaps, God gets pushed a little further out. We used to think lightning was Zeus, rainbows were promises from God, and disease was punishment for sin. Now we know lightning is electricity, rainbows are light refraction through water droplets, and sickness comes from bacteria and viruses. Each explanation replaced faith with understanding. And that's the key difference Neil's pointing out. Religion stops at "we don't know," while science says, "let's find out." The Bible itself reflects that ancient ignorance. Genesis 9:13 says God set a bow in the clouds as a sign after the flood, but that was written by people who didn't know about optics, sunlight angles, or atmospheric scattering. The God of the gaps doesn't explain the world. It explains why people stopped looking for answers. Real progress comes from curiosity, not surrendering to mystery. That's what drives discovery, and it's why we've advanced more in the last 200 years of science than in thousands of years of prayer.
So normally I don't go here. Normally I don't go here, because I just like talking about astrophysics. But given this conference and given how many of you out there are rabid atheists, I got to give you a bone here. I got to toss you a bone, okay? So I'm going to toss you a few bones, okay? Just because you're rabid, all right? So let's look at some data here. You probably know all these data. Actually, the data I'm about to show is for the United States. I don't know what it is. I'm sure the data exists. But when I compiled it, I'm going to make yet a separate point. So it wouldn't have mattered what country was represented here. In America, 90% of the nation would claim to be religious. And you define this in a way that's unambiguous. You don't say, well, do you go to church every Sunday? You don't ask that question. Plenty of people go to church who are not religious. They go to get a date or so. They go for the cupcakes or something. They don't go to be spiritually enlightened. So you ask a different question. You say, is there a God that listens to your prayers? If you answer yes to that, you're religious by anybody's definition, because your understanding of a deity is that that deity is monitoring your daily affairs. So that's unambiguous. This number's dropped in the last couple of years, but it's about 90%. Turns out if you go to college and get an advanced degree, a master's or a doctorate, where these are degrees where you actually question the state of existing knowledge. The undergraduate degree doesn't really do that. You're learning from textbooks that are written by somebody else. Your doctrines are already there. The higher degrees imply that you are questioning the very fabric of the knowledge you had previously learned. Among that community, it's 60%. It has dropped. Well, that's interesting. Let's keep going. How about scientists of all stripes? So biologists, chemists, let's include engineers as well, people who have formal scientific training, mathematicians as well. Okay, what happens next? Drops to 40%. Now, if you look at this number, it looks like, wow, so scientists, the public is 90%, scientists are 40%. No, the drop is not that significant, because every scientist has an advanced degree. So in fact, the drop is not from 90 to 40, the drop is from 60 to 40. So becoming a scientist is not as big an effect on whether you're religious as you might otherwise think. Most of the drop comes because you're educated beyond the level of college. So that's 40%. So now you go to elite scientists, members of the National Academy, highly accomplished subset among scientists. The number drops to 7%. There was a headline in Nature, the British journal Nature, which said, after this study was released, 93% of elite scientists reject God. So that was supposed to be a shocking headline. And I look at that and I said, that's not even interesting. That was the trend line anyway. What's more interesting, which was not the headline, is that 7% of elite scientists pray to a God. Isn't that a more interesting fact to you? Isn't that kind of interesting? The most accomplished scientists in the world, in that community, 7% of them still pray to a personal God. I think that is deserving of more study than the 93% who don't. Because something's going on there. We don't know what. And I have confronted people on this. I would say, to the most sort of vociferous in the atheist community, I would say, you're beating the public over the head, telling them, why are you doing that? And I'm thinking, before you beat the public, why don't you beat them over the head, okay? No, I'm just saying, if you're going to rank, understand that first, because if you can't convert that 7%, you've got no hope in the general public. That's all I'm saying. this is among the ranks of the scientifically educated. Now, philosophers basically invented atheism. And if you do this, if you check the statistic for philosophers, it's below 1%. There are no religious, the only religious philosophers there are, they're like theologian philosophers, all right? If you subtract the theologic philosophers, this number is essentially zero, all right? So they're basically birthed atheism, the philosophers.
Neil brings up something most people never think about. The more education you have, the less likely you are to believe in a personal God. It's not arrogance, it's exposure. Once you start questioning ideas, testing them, and demanding evidence, blind faith doesn't hold up. In the US, about 90% of the general public say they believe in God, but that number drops to 60% among people with master's or doctoral degrees. Among top-tier scientists, members of the National Academy of Sciences, only about 7% believe in a personal God. And it makes sense. The scientific method is built on skepticism and testing, while religion asks for acceptance without proof. The more you study cosmology, genetics, and neuroscience, the more the gaps that used to be filled by God get replaced with measurable explanations. Philosophers, the people trained to question everything, are almost entirely non-religious for that reason. Once you understand how knowledge is built, you realize faith isn't knowledge at all. It's the placeholder that disappears when real answers show up.
And there's this talk, I don't know here in Australia, does the Bible in the public school class or not? No, is it by law or is it just by tradition? Is it by law? Okay, so in America there's this understanding that the state and the church are separate. And by and large, that's been honored for most of the history of the country, by and large. And what's interesting about America, a point that was a little bit alluded to earlier today, is that it was founded on the principle that the state has no religion. The state is indifferent to what religion you might have. So that means there's no authority over you that's going to tell you who and what to worship. And that's a state that we all take for granted, but so many places in the world that is not true. Well, there's a case in New Jersey where a middle school kid was lectured to by the history teacher in a public school, and the history teacher said, if you don't accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you are going to hell. And there's a little Muslim girl there, said you are already damned to hell. First point. Second, that Noah had dinosaurs on his ark. Third point he made is that Big Bang and evolution are just theories, and you can take them or leave them. So, I don't, like I said, I don't get into these. I just don't. We got people who do this. We've got the four horsemen. We got our boy here who's coming up after. We got people who fight this stuff. I'm not one of those, really. I'm doing this because, like, I know you're all, this is the bone I'm throwing you, but I don't do this. So, but then I thought about it and I said, I have an op-ed, a letter to the editor on this that I can write. And I left out the part about Jesus. I left that out. Because if that's how he feels, he wants you to be Christian, that's okay, fine. I left that out. I went to the rest of what he said. And this was my letter, as it appeared in the New York Times. People cited violation of the First Amendment when that's a separation of church and state, essentially. New Jersey school teacher asserted that evolution and the Big Bang are not scientific and that Noah's Ark carried dinosaurs. The case is not about the need to separate church and state. It's about the need to separate ignorant, scientifically illiterate people from the ranks of teachers. That's the problem. If he wants to believe Jesus is his savior, that's not synonymous with being scientifically illiterate, because 40% of American scientists pray to a personal God. What is identical with being scientifically literate is that if Noah was a human being, he did not have dinosaurs on his ark, because humans and dinosaurs did not coexist. All right? every one of those scientists knows that, even the 40% who pray to God. So this is how I've sort of split the kingdom there. Then you get the billboard wars. Okay, this was fun. Big Bang Theory. You got to be kidding. God. All right. So this goes on. This is what we put up with. All right. So then then there was like, let's come back. Praise Darwin, evolved beyond belief. Freedom from religion founded. So the billboard wars are in progress here. There's some people who are like okay with God and okay with sort of how things evolve, so they ride the fence. So here's a bumper sticker. The Big Bang Theory, God spoke and bang, it happened, you know? So they're excited about both, God and the Big Bang. But then we had this idiot back in May, Judgment Day. Did this Judgment Day stuff reach below the equator? Jeez, okay. Yeah, it was. Now the good thing, unlike other predictions, like Jesus will come one day, this had a date, okay? You could test it. This was like easy to test. You just sort of wait around for it, all right? So, now it turns out that May 21st was only the day Jesus was supposed to show up. The actual end of the world is October 21st. So the end of the world is still to come this year. This is directly from the website. So I had to tweet. So this was May 21st. So on May 21st, or May 20th, I tweeted this. If Jesus actually arrives May 21st, it'll be easy to convince skeptics. If he doesn't show up, do the faithful become atheists? That was my question. Now, in a Twitter stream, it's a live conversation with complete strangers. Everybody depositing their 140 characters worth of thought. So here this is. There was a huge reaction to that tweet. Now, you would expect that most of my followers, or at least a big fraction of them, would be sort of atheistic. So you'd expect people to say, this guy's an idiot, why are we even spending any time on them? Well, one such person did make such a reply, but not in the way you might think. No, anyone who's read the Bible knows this camping asshole was full of shit from the start. Okay. So what do you do with that? So this is somebody complaining about the prediction of Jesus coming because he says this other guy doesn't know jack about the Bible, but this guy does. And went on, there are other places where people quoted that one can't know when Jesus comes. So the fact that this guy's saying he knows means he doesn't read the Bible. So this is what's out there. People who are ready to vociferously argue about who knows the Bible the least.
The problem isn't belief, it's ignorance pretending to be education. When a public school teacher tells kids that dinosaurs rode on Noah's Ark, or that evolution is just a theory, that's not faith. That's misinformation. Every credible field of science, from geology to genetics, proves humans and dinosaurs lived 65 million years apart. Fossil layers, radiometric dating, and even DNA degradation timelines confirm that gap beyond dispute. The First Amendment wasn't written to erase religion. It was written to protect learning from it. The founders knew that when you mix scripture with science, you destroy both. Teaching creationism in science class isn't freedom of religion. It's the end of critical thinking. Even among scientists who still believe in God, none deny evolution or the Big Bang. That shows faith and facts don't have to fight, unless you force them to. So what do you think? Should religion stay out of science classrooms completely? Let me know in the comments, hit like if you agree, and subscribe for more videos that challenge belief with evidence.
Lots of Christians in America feel Christianity is under attack and that Christians deserve special rights. including tax dollars to support private Christian schools. They want to require prayer in schools and sex education classes to teach abstinence only. Some have convinced states to pass anti-gay, anti-transgender, and anti-abortion bills.
I take the view that religious communities make a very significant contribution to our society. Not, and I would say we no longer, despite trappings, live in Christian societies in the West. Christianity in many ways has been decentered, which I would say is a good thing, but it has to move itself away from a position of privilege at the head of the table to take its place in a broader community.
Mixing politics with religion is fraught with danger. We all know theocracies where leaders govern by the will of an infallible God. Openly defying the correct faith is called blasphemy and leads to harsh punishments, even death. I think everyone should have the right to practice any religion or none, as long as they don't force their beliefs on others. I appreciate people whose religion inspires them to work on important social justice issues. In countries that are not theocratic, politics might still be infused with religion. My country, the United States, has a secular government with a problem of religion immersed in politics. I hold in my hand a godless document. It's the United States Constitution. Our framers established the first nation in history meant to separate religion and government. Authority rests with we the people, the first three words of the Constitution, not without the deity. The only mentions of religion in the Constitution are exclusionary. The First Amendment prohibits the U.S. Congress from making laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Article 6 prohibits religious tests for public office. That didn't stop some states from putting religious requirements in their state constitutions, including my state. I was a candidate for governor of South Carolina in 1990 to challenge the provision of my state constitution that bars atheists from holding public office. After an 8-year legal battle, I won a unanimous decision in the South Carolina Supreme Court, striking down this unconstitutional religious test requirement. The U.S. Declaration of Independence, which is not a governing document, does refer to a creator endowing people with unalienable rights. The Declaration was a call for rebellion against the British Crown to distinguish us from an empire that asserted the divine right of kings. Our founders were products of the Enlightenment, looking toward reason and evidence from the natural world. Many were deists, referring to nature's God, who set the laws of nature in motion and then retired as deity emeritus. Had they known about evolution and modern science, many would likely have been atheists. In 1954, American President Dwight Eisenhower signed into law the addition of the words "under God" to our Pledge of Allegiance to distinguish us from godless communists. This turned our secular pledge, recited daily by students, into a religious pledge. America is one nation under the Constitution, or maybe under Canada, but we're not one nation under God. Similarly, "In God We Trust" became our controversial national motto in 1956, at the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, replacing the more inclusive motto, e pluribus unum, Latin for out of many one. The Ten Commandments are another divisive issue. Many Americans who want them displayed in schools and courts either don't realize or don't care that the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods, conflicts with the First Amendment, which guarantees the freedom to worship one, many, or no gods. Churches and individuals are certainly free to post the Ten Commandments openly, just not on government buildings. In 2016, Donald Trump became president in large part because of overwhelming support of white Christian evangelicals. Many are also white Christian nationalists who long for the olden days when their white privilege enabled them more easily to discriminate against those of a different race and those with non-Christian or no religious beliefs. These white Christian nationalists are trying to rewrite American history, claiming that the U.S. was formed as a Christian nation.
Religion and politics have always been a dangerous mix. History shows that when governments claim divine authority, reason and human rights disappear. During Europe's Middle Ages, questioning the church could mean torture or death. The same pattern appears in modern theocracies like Iran or Saudi Arabia, where laws come from religion, not evidence or human equality. Silverman is right that America's founders built a different model. The Constitution never mentions God. It gives power to the people, not to priests or kings. The founders came out of the Enlightenment, when thinkers like John Locke and Voltaire argued that morality and law should come from reason and experience, not revelation. Science has shown that natural processes, not divine intervention, explain life and the universe. Evolution, proven through genetics and fossils, replaced the old creation story. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old, not a few thousand. No credible evidence shows a supernatural force guiding nations or politics.
On January 6, 2021, we learned just how fragile my country's democracy could be, as Donald Trump incited a mob of terrorists to storm our nation's capital in an attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Many were inspired by their white Christian nationalism. Lots of Christians in America feel Christianity is under attack and that Christians deserve special rights, including tax dollars to support private Christian schools. They want to require prayer in schools and sex education classes to teach abstinence only. Some have convinced states to pass anti-gay, anti-transgender, and anti-abortion bills. Some also promote unscientific religious teachings like creationism in secular schools. Christians have a lot of influence over the U.S. government. The Republican Party succeeded in packing our Supreme Court with conservative Christian justices who in June will vote to overturn Roe v. Wade, a 1973 decision that legalized abortion everywhere in the U.S. Looking at countries around the world shows that religion and politics can make a terrible partnership, and when mixing the two, we often get the worst of both. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Professor Kaur?
Thank you. I think I'd like to take a slightly different approach in the topic of religion and politics. So I'm speaking from the Sikh perspective, both in my academic capacity, but also from personal experience. And I think when considering this topic, it's important to take into consideration lived experience. So I'm an anthropologist by background. And what I'd really like to do is to focus on actually the understanding of what we mean when we say religion, what we mean when we say politics. what we say in the Sikh faith is that there is not a separation of these two domains. It comes down to a fundamental understanding of what we define religion as, what we define politics as, and we don't see these as kind of conflicting domains in the Sikh faith itself. So I really want to draw attention to the way that we understand these concepts. So for example, in the Sikh faith, there is no term specifically for secular. So in the spoken language, there is no term for secular, there is no term for religion. We talk about dharam, which is this all-encompassing worldview. And so within that, all of these thoughts, mindsets, and beliefs are part of that. And when we talk about a divine or a god, we don't mean this very kind of Abrahamic definition of a god, and so this does not permeate the way that Sikhs practice and believe their faith. So I don't see this as being a fundamental issue for Sikhs in the way that they practice. Having said that, religion and politics have taken a more academic approach in general discourse, and what that means to say is that then they are set up as these two dichotomous realms. But what I want to go back to is where I started, this lived experience. How does that work for people in practice? How does that work for politicians? How does that work for religious scholars? When we talk about politics, are we talking about politics with a small p or a capital P? How are we defining these terms? How are we actually implementing these terms? And I think I'm going to leave my reflection quite short because I think it's more interesting if we engage in a bit of conversation.
What happened on January 6th showed how religion can twist politics into something dangerous. People stormed the U.S. Capitol shouting prayers, holding crosses, and claiming they were defending God's country. That wasn't faith. That was fanaticism. It's what happens when people start believing their political side speaks for God. Studies after the attack confirmed it. The Public Religion Research Institute found that the strongest predictor of sympathy for the rioters wasn't party affiliation. It was Christian nationalism, the belief that America was chosen by God and should be ruled by Christian law. That mindset doesn't protect freedom. It destroys it. We're now seeing laws shaped by that same thinking. Bans on abortion, attacks on LGBTQ+ rights, and science being replaced with dogma in classrooms. The data is clear. Abstinence-only education doesn't work, and teaching creationism isn't education, it's indoctrination. Yet billions of tax dollars still fund religious schools pushing those views. The truth is, when government bends to religion, everyone loses. Believers and non-believers alike. The founders built a secular nation for a reason, to protect us from this exact kind of moral dictatorship. Faith should guide personal life, not public policy. Because once religion controls politics, reason stops leading the way.
Thank you very much, Professor Gordon.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I am by training a historian of the early modern period with a particular interest in the Reformation, and just to pick up on some of the comments already, it likewise is a world in which politics and religion cannot be separated, and it certainly wasn't in their mind. And one of the things that I think is significant about the Reformation was that it brought a new way of thinking about the relationship between the temporal powers, spiritual powers, and the way in which the Reformation was in itself inherently not only political, in the sense that the reformers decided very early on that what had to happen was that if there was to be any chance of success, the reform of Christianity had to be tied to political authority. So right from its inception, the Protestant Reformation was inherently political. But what they understood by this political was the kind of the coterminous that the body of the faithful of the church was that of the state. But very quickly, and I'll just make a broad story very short, it became a movement that in many ways ate its own principles, that the Protestant churches, having emerged as a movement of rebellion, as resistance against medieval Catholicism, very quickly instituted itself and began to practice very much many of the things in which it had reacted. Violence, it was putting persecution, it was putting dissent dissenters to death very quickly after the implementation of the Reformation. So this is a subject that interests me very much as a historian of the pre-modern world, is the very sort of fluid relationship between religion and politics, and what have been some of the consequences of that, particularly through the Reformation, the growth of religious diversity, the fragmentation of the Reformation into many different religious movements, which created questions of coexistence. How do you deal with difference in terms of religion within political bodies? This is, by the 17th century, is a central question. Starts to raise issues of toleration. John Locke and some of the early thinkers about this. I'm not saying there's a linear development, but these are the questions of religion and pluralism are very important. And I think that's actually a helpful thing for us to reflect on in our contemporary discussions. I am a practicing Christian of the Reformed tradition, a kind of progressive perspective that sees very much engagement in the world in terms of, and some of the things that have already been mentioned, social reform, social justice, questions that are very important to us. I take the view that religious communities make a very significant contribution to our society. Not, and I would say we no longer, just by trappings, live in Christian societies in the West. Christianity in many ways has been discentered, which I would say is a good thing, but it has to move itself away from a position of privilege at the head of the table to take its place in a broader community of religious communities and non-religious communities, in offering something which I think can make a significant contribution to our society. Not from, as I say, a place of domination, of privilege or power, but as communities who are actively engaged in a whole range of activities that are of enormous social benefit. So I'm very keen to engage in this conversation in ways in which I think religious communities make a significant contribution to society.
Thank you very much, Professor Gordon. Last but not least, Dr. Freud-Kandel.
Thank you. It's lovely to have Locke and tolerance referenced, because my interest in this topic is primarily in terms of my background is in theology and the study in particular of the Jewish community in Britain and the pathways of resettlement that the Jewish community has navigated, in which undoubtedly the role of tolerance as a central defining principle in the British political system played an incredibly important role in the different ways, the different pathways in which Jews found a place within British society. Having said that, my particular interest in examining that journey of the Jewish community in Britain entails understanding and examining the influence that an established church has precisely had on the opportunities that minority religious groups were able to enjoy in a British context. And there, as I say, the influence of Lockean toleration in combination with the role of an established church in the way in which it played out in an English context was incredibly important, on the one hand in a very positive way, in enabling Jews in Britain, in a very notable contrast to the experiences of Jews, for example, in continental Europe, from having to undergo a process of having to explain away and their role, their acceptability within British society. The notion of tolerance in an established society in Britain meant that Jews in a British context were discriminated against in terms of being non-Anglican, but they were not discriminated against as Jews per se, and that significantly altered their experience. But having said that this was a positive on some level, there is a flip side to that. And Bill Williams is a social historian who coined the term the anti-Semitism of tolerance to characterize the Jewish experience in Britain. What does that mean? It means that the whole premise of tolerance is that there is one correct view, and that is Anglicanism in an English context. But within the parameters of that notion of tolerance, there is an acceptance of alternative views, albeit while not accepting them as fully ideal. So this anti-Semitism of tolerance impacts on the way in which the Jewish experience developed, leading the Jewish community in Britain precisely to construct institutions which in many ways can be seen to seek to offer parallels to the Church of England, because that was the way in which Jews in Britain felt that they had to seek to find a pathway to being fully accepted. And so that's why we see the emergence of centralized institutions as critical to the formation of the Jewish community in Britain, often at the expense of creativity within the community, because the emphasis is on creating umbrella bodies that can provide parallels to Anglican structures. But by creating these umbrella bodies, you focus on that which everyone shares rather than creating a space in which to articulate alternative voices. And so those are my sort of primary interests in terms of the interrelationships between church and state, religion and politics, the way in which on the one hand it can be incredibly beneficial, but on the other hand in terms of the very severe challenges it poses. But I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Professor Gordon reminded us that the Reformation started as a rebellion against religious power, but quickly became another form of control. That cycle of faith movements rising against oppression only to become oppressive themselves is a pattern we've seen for centuries. Once religion and politics merge, power corrupts both. The church used to burn heretics. Now it simply legislates morality. The method changed, but the mindset didn't. Even Gordon admits that Christianity in the West has lost its privileged seat at the table, and that's progress. True equality begins when no faith claims authority over others. Religion can still do good, but only when it operates from compassion, not dominance. Dr. Freud Kandel's analysis of tolerance in Britain reveals the same tension. Tolerance sounds fair, but as she explained, it was really permission granted by those in power, an acceptance that still implied inferiority. Jews were allowed to exist, not to belong. That's not equality, that's control dressed up as kindness. History shows that mixing religion with politics always creates insiders and outsiders. The only lasting solution is a secular one, where belief is personal and the law belongs to everyone equally. So here's the question. In a world still divided by belief, can we finally build societies that value truth and empathy over ancient authority? If you found this discussion thought-provoking, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into religion, history, and reason.
That means that for some reason, suddenly that moral worth comes in, but it wasn't there before when you had these two cells who had half the DNA, but suddenly there's a
correct, yes, something magical happens at that.
It's not magical, Charlie, we know about this.
Well, hold on.
Charlie.
Time out.
Simply about the fact that if you feel like that's what you need to do with your body, then that's what you do. Because I could also...
Well, hold on a second. If it's not your DNA, how is it your body?
It is your DNA.
No, it's not.
It's a part of you. It's growing in you. It's connected to you by an umbilical cord. It is a part of you.
1 second. It's attached.
A part.
It's attached, not a part. Part, by definition, means it remains permanent.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Oh, okay.
So an attachment is something that is temporary. And so you are not your mom's DNA. You're not your dad's DNA. You are new deoxyribonucleic acid.
All right, so thank you for coming, Charlie. My question to you, I'm a medical student, and so I'm going to throw out the big A word. I know you get asked about it a lot, but I want to hear from you what your opinion is on abortion.
Life begins at conception.
But about abortion specifically. Why do you think abortion's wrong specifically?
Well, you agree murder is wrong?
I agree. Okay, so this is where we get to the question, right? Because what is it about murder you say is wrong? Like, why is murder wrong?
Well, because it's a human being, not just because it has consciousness or because it's of a certain age, because it's a human.
And what is it that gives human being this moral worth?
Not its consciousness necessarily.
I didn't say it's consciousness.
I know, I can imagine it because it is a human being, because it has a soul.
And what is this soul? Where does this come from? This idea that it's...
Exactly. Again, the Greeks postulated that it is the entirety of your being. Okay, you guys can laugh. It's true. Every civilization has had a different belief, but agreed upon ethical monotheism, which is the creed of the West and what the birth certificate of my country articulates, is that every human being is more than just matter, it's more than just a clump of cells, but it also has an invisible element to you that will live beyond you.
Fine, so, can you say that comes from the Bible, or where else do you get that from?
Ethical monotheism, which is the creed of the West. And again, the Declaration of Independence mentions God 4 times. The founders were explicitly believed not in a secular morality, but a divinely given one, of at least this idea that there is a God and you are not him. And let me ask you, what is the first stage of human development?
So this is the thing, right? We can take it from the sperm being generated in the father and the oocyte being generated in the mother, right? They fuse at birth, conception, sorry. The only thing that happens at conception is these two cells fuse.
No,
right?
DNA is created. A zygote.
DNA is not created.
A DNA, no, that's not true. The DNA,
Charlie,
DNA coding at the zygote. Hold on, time out.
I'll let you finish.
Does a zygote have a unique marker?
Charlie, DNA...
Does a zygote have a unique marker?
You have to let me speak. You have to...
But answer it, yes or no. Does a zygote have a unique marker?
Define a unique marker.
Meaning, can you differentiate the DNA coding between the mother and the zygote if you examine it under a deoxyribonucleic acid analysis? Can you?
Only purely because the addition comes from the father.
Oh, so it is something different.
Charlie, DNA is not created. DNA is not created. You have, the father has his own genome, the mother has her own genome. They fuse. This is why you have the same characteristics, similar ones to your mother, similar ones to your father. That's why you have similar characteristics to your siblings. DNA is not created, right? So when you ask me, where does a human being come from? I can say to you, it starts at conception, but all conception is these two cells joining, right? But these two cells were created, the mother's cells were created long before, they were created when she was a fetus. So there's none of this DNA being produced, right? So we can't establish, the only thing that happens at conception is these two cells fuse. Now this idea that means that for some reason, suddenly that moral worth comes in, but it wasn't there before when you had these two cells who had half the DNA, but suddenly there's a
Correct,
yes,
something magical happens at that
moment. It's not magical, Charlie, we know about this.
When people like Charlie Kirk say life begins at conception, they ignore basic biology. Conception isn't the creation of life, it's the merging of two already living cells. Sperm and egg each carry DNA long before they meet. At fertilization, those DNA strands just recombine. That's not new life in a moral sense, it's cell division, the same natural process that happens in countless organisms that never become human beings. And when he brings up the idea of a soul, that's not science, it's theology. The Bible itself doesn't even support his claim. In Genesis 2:7, life begins when Adam breathes. Breath, not conception, is the biblical marker of life. Historically, even major Christian thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas believed ensoulment came weeks after conception, not at the moment sperm meets egg. The Catholic Church only shifted to conception in the 19th century, showing this belief is cultural, not eternal truth. So when Charlie falls back on magic to explain why a zygote should suddenly be treated as morally equal to a fully conscious person, that's not evidence. It's avoidance. The science and even the history of his own religion undermine his claim.
Well, hold on.
Charlie.
Time out. Hold on.
Charlie, I promise you, I'm not trying to score points. I'm not trying to score points on you. This is genuinely...
We call it the miracle of life for a reason. We've not been able to yet replicate human life development outside of the womb.
We call it the miracle of life because, yes, it's something beautiful, the ability to form a new...
Magical.
It's not... You say magical as in, oh, it's beautiful, it's an incredible thing that happens, of course. But it's not incredible in the sense we don't know what's going on. There's no new DNA coming out of nowhere.
Hold on, but time out. Isn't there a separate DNA, though, than the mother?
Yes, from the father.
Okay, yes, but it's not the father's DNA either. A new coding is created.
Charlie,
you are a blend of the two. And so when did your life begin?
Okay, so
when did your life begin?
I mean, again, this comes from what you define as where life starts. You can say life starts at conception, but I'm telling you, I believe that's just an arbitrary point, right? That's just the moment these two cells fuse. Now, you say about this mother thing. So the way DNA is arranged in a cell is it's arranged in chromosomes. Chromosomes are paired up, so you have one from the mother, one from the father, typically, in a healthy individual, right? Now, you can take those maternal chromosomes out and you can find that this is who the person's mother is, and you can do the same with the father. Now, the reason you are different to your mother and father is because some of those chromosomes express genes that are different from each other, and so those genes interact, and that's what gives rise to you, right? But there's no space for any kind of moral framework to come into that until you consider that a human being is capable of consciousness and of suffering. But if you take that out of the equation, the fact that these two DNA, whatever they call molecules, right? These two DNA molecules are fusing, that does not suddenly flip a switch that attributes moral worth to that individual. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not trying to score points. I'm trying to understand.
By what moral standard do you believe that?
I believe that if an individual is capable of suffering, then it's wrong. Now, can I explain my opinion on abortion, just so you can understand? I would agree, as many reasonable people would, that at 9 months, it's unreasonable to expect someone to get an abortion, right? Unless you have some extreme circumstances. But for an elective abortion seems a bit radical to me. But it also seems radical to say that a woman who has just, the cells have just fused, to deny her of an abortion also seems wrong to me. Because that zygote is not capable of suffering, as far as we know.
So by what moral standard? Is that just your opinion? Where did you get that moral standard from?
Because suffering is a bad thing. We all know suffering is a bad thing. That's an objective fact, right?
Hold on. So you do believe in objective morality?
I believe that suffering is an objectively negative
So if you can't feel it, is it okay?
What do you mean if you can't?
You can't feel the pain, is it okay to inflict the pain?
In the sense that if no one's suffering from it, if you have a scenario where nobody is suffering from something, then yes, of course. Something is only a moral question if it affects someone's well-being.
So let me just make sure I understand this correctly. That if it doesn't affect their well-being, so dementia patients that don't know who they are or where they're from, can we execute dementia patients because they're confused about their well-being?
Can you imagine a scenario?
Or Alzheimer's patients.
Charlie,
Alzheimer's patients don't really know much about anything. Can we schedule them for execution because they can't technically suffer?
I'll respond. So can you imagine a scenario where we lived in a society where we killed people when they suffered from dementia, were incapable of suffering, and we killed them, right? It's not a scenario that involves an absence of suffering. There's still suffering involved. Imagine you grow up thinking, my dad could be killed at any moment because he's going to get dementia. Imagine living your life thinking, I could get dementia and suddenly I'd be killed by my state.
Imagine a world where you slaughter 1 million babies every year in America.
Charlie, it's not slaughter, that's the problem.
Hold on, if it's a forcible removal from the umbilical cord of another human life, again, we have clarity but not agreement. Biologically, you know that your entire coding began at conception. Your coding, your uniqueness.
That's what I'm denying. I disagree with that.
Okay, when those two cells fused together, to use your terminology,
yes,
that is where the process of
scientifically accepted terminology.
In the interest of time, can we bring this question to a close?
The process of human development objectively begins at that moment. Therefore, those human beings are deserving of human rights.
What makes Charlie's position fall apart is that he keeps treating DNA as if it's some magic stamp of personhood. But DNA doesn't create moral value. Every living cell, from skin cells to bacteria, has DNA. Having a genetic code doesn't make something a conscious being with rights. What matters is the capacity to experience, to suffer, to have awareness. That's why modern ethics, medicine, and even secular law draw the line not at conception, but at viability, brain activity, or the capacity for sentience. The student is right. Suffering is the real moral standard. That's not opinion. It's grounded in philosophy and supported by science. The philosopher Jeremy Bentham put it simply back in the 18th century. The question is not, can they reason? Nor, can they talk? But, can they suffer? That idea shaped human rights, animal welfare, and modern bioethics. Charlie tries to derail this with dementia patients, but that misses the point. Dementia patients can still feel pain, fear, and joy. They can still suffer. They're also embedded in families and communities, so killing them would cause enormous suffering for others. That's exactly why the student's argument holds up. Morality is about reducing harm and suffering, not about clinging to a mystical idea of souls or coding. And calling abortion slaughter is emotional manipulation. The reality is that most abortions occur in the first trimester, when the embryo has no brain activity and no capacity for pain. That's not slaughter, that's medicine. The numbers show it clearly. In the United States, about 93% of abortions happen before 13 weeks, long before the nervous system is developed enough for suffering.
Rights. We keep going, or do you want to?
No, thank you. Yeah, you can finish.
The process of development begins from the moment the sperm is being generated in the father, the moment the eggs are being generated in the mother. To say that suddenly the moral worth switches on when they fuse doesn't make any sense. That's just a point you've taken.
It makes perfect sense, because that is when your journey as a human being, when the sperm and egg were separate, you were not yet a fused human being. You were not created uniquely.
DNA
in
existed.
any image.
Your DNA existed. I thought.
Well, no, the parts of your